Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown. My name is Pojo, and today we are going to be talking about a full mechanics spoiler that came out for Eternal Argent Depths today. So we have an introduction to the 3 mechanics that are going to be added in Argent Depths, or rather 2 new mechanics and 1 returning mechanic. We are seeing a return of Revenge. There was also a cycle of market cards that has been revealed, so we're going to be talking about those as well at the end of the video. I have a lot of notes on the design of them. I think they're very interesting. So yeah, let's go ahead and get right down to it. First things first, the one that we already know about, everyone is talking about Decay. So we already saw Roland Iron Tyrant. He has Decay and Endurance. When an enemy unit dies, play a Silverblade Reaper, and people were speculating about what Decay was, and most people guessed that it was some sort of infect-related ability. In other words, when you deal damage, apply that many -1/-1 effects, and most people were in fact right. It is in fact exactly like that. The text on Decay reads, when this deals damage to a unit or relic weapon, that card's strength and health, or armor, are permanently reduced by that much. So effectively, anytime that you attack a unit or a relic weapon, you give it a -1/-1 for every damage that you deal. So, as a simple example, Brightling here, a solid draft card that allows you to basically create a small flying defender, is a flying Decay unit that whenever it blocks something like a 2/2, that 2/2 will become a 1/1 because you deal 1 damage to it and reduce its strength and health by that much. This is obviously not an incredibly powerful card. In fact, it's like pretty limited in its scope. It has fairly low health, but it does allow you to deal with stickier units a little bit better, and it is a serious roadblock for any deck that's trying to get ahead, since they will constantly lose board value if they are attacking into it. It doesn't provide just a stall, it actually continues to progress the board state as it is blocking, which is something that is very useful on a flying and evasive unit. In addition, you can use it to harm relic weapons, which is kind of an important deal, although for the most part I think this card does not really have the health to stay put in any situation other than a limited format or draft format. But yeah, like in general, Decay allows you to effectively interact with sticky and scary units, shut down void recursion, and mess with decks that are trying to do duplication effects, any type of recursion where you are basically repeating an effect through Dark Return or Immortalize or Mirror Image. Because you are damaging the unit and also permanently reducing its stats, you are making it so that it becomes not a problem in a way that people can't really return from. And that permanence is sort of what you're looking for with Decay. You're trying to find a way to answer a card so that it cannot basically come back, which is pretty handy. In addition, reducing the strength of units on when you're hitting them is pretty useful as well. Like, it is always positive board state effect. It's a pretty simple mechanic, but it's not really a bad one by any means. And I think that is something that we're going to see a lot of. So, or we're going to see a lot of and should have some pretty good gameplay. I appreciate the return, I think, to this sort of more simplistic options in terms of this kind of stuff. Like, I think it's a pretty useful thing to have like this kind of like more simple mechanic. And I think that it is, yeah, going to be pretty profitable for the game as a whole in terms of how it feels to play. As a better example of a more powerful card that you might actually play in the current format, we have Chemical Rounds, a Decay 1-cost spell that deals 2 damage. So for a red card, this is pretty decently powerful. It's not a fast spell, so it's not strictly better than Char, but it does allow you to not only deal 2 damage to a unit, but also reduce that unit's offense by 2, which is pretty handy if you can play it on a unit that is really, really kind of irritating to you. If you're up against, say, like a 2/4 and you hit it with a Chemical Rounds, or a 2/5 for that matter, this is something that basically turns that unit off completely and turns it into an effective wall. So even on higher health units, Chemical Rounds has a lot of permanence and a lot of general like benefit. And I think that actually provides it with a pretty interesting aspect of more defensive fire, which is interesting for control decks and interesting for anything that wants to do stuff with spell damage, for example. There's a lot of cool ways that you can play around with this card and open it up to sort of access slightly better stuff. Another card that we have Decay on, and we're probably going to be seeing a lot of Decay on Shadow in particular, is Razor Edge. Razor Edge is a little whip here that is a 1/5, which is a pretty decent stat line for a Shadow card, and it has Decay on it, so it reduces the health of units. It is fairly effective at doing so, and it also reduces their attack, which makes it easier to deal with the card later on, as well as easier to continue to attack into it with the Razor Edge and use your health in that fashion. I think this card's very strong. I think that if you're building up a large Razor Edge, you're getting rid of a lot of problems in a way that is just really profitable for you, and the extra health on the Relic Weapon very, very much helps. This is one of the best 3-cost Relic Weapons that we've seen, and as an uncommon like draft card, I think this is a really good draft card, and also potentially has some viability in a more focused deck that is trying to buff up the weapon and use that decay damage in a much more effective option. For example, if you're doing like Pillar of Progress, Whetstone, Corendon stuff or something like that, you can then use Razor Edge to continually recur, armor it up a bunch, and just sort of like make this card very powerful while also allowing you to kill units and then they don't come back ever, which is sticky units are often an issue for relic weapon based decks. This is something that kind of really gives Shadow an interesting option and an interesting in on that particular aspect. Yeah, the mechanic is very simple, but it is like very clean. It's good design. I think that overall it should be a reasonable amount of fun to play with, so I'm pretty excited about that one. Not as excited as I am for the next one, though. So the next mechanic that we have is something called Plunder, which we can see here on this card, Shifting Illusion. Flying Summon Plunder. So when you are plundering, it is one of two things. You are transforming a card in your hand. So you're picking a card that is already in your hand and turning it into something else. And you have two options. The first is if the card is not a power card, you can turn it into a power card, meaning that Shifting Illusion allows you to fix a hand that is broken. If you are playing a 1-drop unit here and you summon and plunder, then you don't have your third power for the game, then this is a card that allows you to pretty effectively get yourself to that third power and play up to the power that you want. However, if you have too many power cards, you can instead choose to plunder one of your power cards, which will turn it into a treasure trove, a 2-cost colorless card that draws a card. People are pretty familiar with treasure troves at this point, but you would understand why this is a pretty effective option. Like, basically this means that you aren't going to have as many issues with mana screw or mana flood while you are playing with plunder cards. There is an opportunity cost to treasure troves. Effectively, they do require you to at least pay the power to get into other options, but if you are continuously plundering with some sort of continuous plunder effect, or if you are just getting the plunders off of some basic summons while playing incidental units that do this plundering, in either fashion you are making your deck more reliable and you are making your deck convert its power into basically more effective resources when you need to. If you have too much power, you can very easily get new cards. If you have too little power, you can very easily fix a broken hand and thus keep hands that you wouldn't otherwise be able to, which gives you a lot of deceptive power in your deck as a result of this. Shifting Illusion is a pretty minimal example of how this design works. It's really, really fun in a draft environment because it gives you a small evasive option, and it means that your hands are not going to be causing you a lot of problems. The sigil is of course going to be of your starting deck's factions. It is an equal chance. It is not based on what unit you are transforming, so you don't get to fix your particular influence with plunder, but you can get at least some benefits from it and potentially get the power that you need off of a card like Shifting Illusion to fix influence, since it is an equal chance of whatever's in your starting deck's factions. So yeah, like, this is kind of interesting. I think that overall the plunder mechanic is really, really well designed for like keeping the game very fun and simple. If you want to like have like a good sort of new player experience, I think effects like Plunder, similar to effects like Scry, are like really kind of like useful, or Scout rather, are really kind of useful for making these 75 card decks a lot more consistent and a lot more like just generally interesting to play. There's a lot less dead draws, there is a lot less of the like late game mana flood and like sort of the central issues that people have with deck building games. Plunder is one of those things that really resolves these problems in a way that is really interesting and fun to play around with. So yeah, we'll be talking about this a little bit more in markets as well, but like this is something that I think is just really, really generally very good for the game. So yeah, the shifting illusion is notably an illusion of a humbug. That's something to kind of pay attention to, or at least it's an illusion that's fooling a humbug. But yeah, like it's kind of an interesting idea. I think that overall, like this card is not particularly powerful, nor is the second card on the list, Gleeful Firebrand, a 1-cost 0/3 that says when you play a spell with cost 5 or more, deal 3 damage to an enemy. The summon Plunder here is obviously very, very good, and the Firebrand itself provides you once again with a defensive fire option. So fire control is looking like it might be a possibility in Argent Depths. If you play a spell with 5 cost or more, deal 3 damage to an enemy. So combine this with, say, Volatility to play a bunch of spells with 5 cost or more, and you can effectively just play a bunch of spells that are like really expensive every turn to try and clear the board or mess with people, and then you are allowing yourself to also deal extra damage to the enemy on top of that, giving you some inevitability and reach, which is really, really handy. I don't know how strong this card is going to be. It doesn't seem like it's going to be a great draft card, but it has some potential as a rare, I think, in certain types of limited builds, as well as certain types of expedition or possibly even throne builds. I think it's very unlikely that this is going to see a lot of play in throne, but expedition-wise, you could potentially find a volatility deck that can really take advantage of this. So it's something to pay attention to. It's a cool piece of art. I like the design of this card quite a bit, and I think that like as far as like fire 0/3s go, this is certainly, you could do a lot worse in terms of 1-cost fire decks. All right, of the 3 Plunder cards that we have seen, one of these things is not like the other. We also have Desert Alchemist, and this card is just good. So here we go. Okay, that didn't stick, but we're gonna fix it. There we go. All right. Desert Alchemist is a 2/1 deadly ambush. Whew. Did it need Plunder? That's already a really, really good stat line. This effectively gives you a 2-cost removal card in time that hits any large unit, which is just really, really effective and interesting. Scorpion Wasp is the other card that sort of does this type of setup, but Desert Alchemist's advantages are that it is 1 cheaper, and also that it has 1 more attack, which means that it is a little bit better against relic weapons and a little bit better basically as being an ambush unit. Since it's a 2/1, it's reasonably fast and aggressive. Ambush is not quite the same as charge, but you can still use ambush as a way to push damage on a card or push damage on a player to activate a large variety of infiltrate-based effects on hits, relic weapon-based strategies, things like the throne room. All of these things like allow you to do some like kind of interesting aggressive options, and also like apply weapons and other big stuff to Desert Alchemist to make it a more offensive unit. On defense, the card is great. It has ambush, it has deadly, and also the summon ability triggers when it ambushes, which means that you immediately get to fix for your 3rd power and basically transition really cleanly into your mid-range games. You can play your Aurelian Merchant, for example, or you can start getting your power together for Sandstorm Titan. This is all like really, really simple stuff. All around this card is just good. Like, it really fits well in draft and limited environments. It seems like something that you'd want to play in Throne or Expedition. It's not going to completely overpower a game, but it is still going to clean up just about any mid-range threat your opponent can play, and it trades really well in the late game with all of the big and very scary units that don't have evasive abilities. So anything big, Desert Alchemist can kill it. That's going to be a really, really big deal. So yeah, this card's super strong. There's a lot of cool stuff going on with it, and like overall it seems like a premier Plunder card that is also going to be one of the most common uncommons in time in this particular set. So that is Plunder. Finally, we have the Return of Revenge. We do have some new Revenge cards coming back. If you're unfamiliar with Revenge, this is once you play the card, you put it in the top 10 cards of your deck, and it plays again with Destiny when you draw it the next time. So effectively gives a card Destiny after you have a wide variety of other stuff happening, and allows you to play most cards twice over the course of a long game. Forget is a simple example of how this works. You can just easily silence an enemy unit, and then later on this card might come out as a surprise and silence something else that you need to deal with. That's a reasonable effect. It's not great because you don't get to control the revenge on the second hit, and also because like you have a higher chance of basically drawing into a dead draw. It won't silence your units because it says specifically enemy unit. That's very good, important text to have going on there. But like overall, this is something that maybe needs to, like, you do have to be kind of like in need of a silence effect that is repeatable in the meta for this to be particularly good, just because of the fact that the card is not going to get its benefit from coming back all that often. It's going to be very similar to a basic silence, which is also a 1-cost time card that has revenge. Still, strictly better than silence, so nothing wrong with that, and could be good in a draft environment as a way to answer flyers and turn off very big threats. It has some value attached to it, so straight away the card's got some decent benefits, and it's overall good revenge design. Another card that we've seen is Mobilisation. This one's going to be a little bit bigger because it has a Stampeding Beast attached to it, but it is a 3-cost double blue that has revenge, and play 2/1/2 Stampeding Beasts. These Stampeding Beasts don't have anything particularly like any extra stats. They are just beasts, but nonetheless, this means that you are getting effectively 4/1/2s for the cost of 3 power, and depending on how good you think a Stampeding Beast is, that might end up being a beneficial effect. Combined with other effects like Xenon Obelisk, you can actually get a really decent sort of defensive line around. I'm skeptical of this card since it doesn't have a lot of reach, and in general, like, what you are doing with these units is going to be a little bit interesting. However, it does enable you to activate certain things, like one of the Destiny cards that we'll be talking about, in particular, the card that we're going to be talking about next. So the final revenge card, and this one is very exciting to see, is Shared Vision. Now, Shared Vision is a 3-cost, and it has revenge, and it also has exhaust 2 of your units to give the top card of your deck Destiny. So right away, Stampeding Beasts is an enabler for this, but in general, like, you are definitely going to need to play a decent amount of units in order to do this. That being said, this is the cheapest method of giving a card Destiny that we have seen printed, and that could potentially be extremely strong depending on what type of setup you are looking for. For example, like, the very basic thing that I would definitely want to do with this is play a red deck or a red-blue deck, get a couple of units out early, and immediately give a World Pyre Phoenix Destiny with Second Sight and Shared Vision. At that point, you have an unkillable Phoenix. If it doesn't get silenced, it just continues to come back every time that it dies. It's a large 5/5 evasive unit that gets bigger, and yeah, you can do some really wild stuff with that. You could also play a Feln deck that is, like, very, very heavy on the influence gathering for cards like Champion of Cunning, but also gives Champion of Cunning or other big Feln units like Midnight Gale or Impending Doom Destiny, so that they come out for free. They draw you new cards, and when you dark return them, they do the same thing again and again and again, combined with stuff like Haunting Scream, Immortalize, basically any type of recursion. Shared Vision becomes a just incredibly powerful Feln archetype, and there's clearly a deck to be built around that can be really, really strong. The influence cost on this is absolutely right. If you have this card at any lower influence, it becomes extremely abusable, and Primal is probably the best place to put it because high Primal influence costs are pretty hard to establish due to the fact that Primal very much functions as a support role in a lot of different types of decks. So basically, you have to get really deep into Primal for this, which is something that Primal is not particularly good at doing. It is often paired with other colors to make itself a little bit stronger, but then afterwards you get the ability to effectively access Destiny on cards like Static Bolt, Second Sight. This is just like a really interesting and fun card that can bring back like Carpet Shuffle archetypes and other types of just insane, ridiculous recursion engines. There's so much fun to be had with this. We are definitely going to be building a lot of Shared Vision decks in the future, and I don't know if any of them are gonna be good, which tells me that this is pretty good design on this card. Alright, so those are the revenge cards, and we have seen Plunder and Decay. The final thing that I want to talk about is market cards. So let's go on like record, I guess, about this. We've talked, I think, a little bit about this, but I am not a big fan of the previous set, and one of the things that I really disliked about the previous set was the design of the market cards, or the market spells. I had a lot of issues with them, and I really did not want to see one-cost market spells continue to make appearances. That being said, we have a cycle of one-cost market spells, and I actually think that they might be the best designed market spells that we have seen so far. So let's talk a little bit about my issues with market cards as of right now. I have a couple of different issues with them. One is that like they typically have very low opportunity costs, so people are able to dig into their sideboards almost for free on a large variety of places. For example, you can see a merchant played as a regular unit on 3, and then have an answer to your opponent's threat without having to pay any extra costs, making the market cards more important than sometimes the deck itself. Having a good market is absolutely critical, and building just 5 cards out of 75 can end a lot of games before like anything else in the deck building sort of happens. I think that like that ability to sideboard is really important for addressing like problem decks, but I also think that like they have like a level of consistency and basically ease of access that is somewhat tricky to deal with. In addition, like the cards tend to have a play pattern that is like something that it does on board, and if you are seeing a market card in every deck, which is something that Direwolf is very much pushing because market is a useful sideboard option that allows for slightly more dynamic games in some aspects. If these cards are doing the same thing every game, then those games become a little bit stale just on account of the fact that they have some sort of onboard impact that is really predictable and easy to understand. So for example, Blazing Salvo is by far the biggest offender here. It's a 1-cost market card that deals 2 damage at fast spell speed, so when you play your cards, you basically know that against a fire deck, you aren't really going to be able to play a 2 health unit without seeing Blazing Salvo into Seer, which made a lot of the early game of Eternal really predictable in the previous set. I thought that like sort of the low cost of these cards combined with the fact that they could be played at fast spell speed meant that basically you could always play cards and just assume that they had an answer to them, and sort of the turns would be very far mapped out ahead as a result of this. Finally, they tend to have like a pretty low threshold. Like you don't need, you get to access your sideboard very, very early in the game, particularly with 1-cost cards, which is kind of an issue because basically that means that you are using your sideboard to supplement your early turns, which is where you should be doing basic setup, and also where like most of the like interesting decisions of the game should be happening. A lot of stuff happens in the early turns of the games that determines the course of the rest of the game, and like if you are doing all of that from the market, then it becomes really about the 5 cards in the market and not so much about what's going on with your deck and your overall deck plan. That became a real issue with the Blazing Salvo Seer combo. I think it's kind of an issue with merchants in general. I think that all of these problems are really well addressed by the market cards that we're going to be covering right now. So we have 1-cost market spells once again. This time they are not fast spells, they are slow spells, and they are called Etchings. The Etchings cycle includes 5 different cards, and okay, gonna need my spoilers to correctly update. So etching cards are 1-cost cards of their particular color, and each of them draws a single sigil from your deck, while also allowing you to, once you have the amount of influence necessary, which is 4 influence of your color, exhaust a unit to swap a card from your hand with a card from your market, which is actually addressing one other issue that I have with market cards, which is that they take cards out of your hand to add cards from your sideboard. This is a card that actually allows you to draw a card and then choose, if you want to trade it into your market. So Primal Etchings will, at the higher amounts of influence, allow you to play a market card off of the top deck thus giving you access to your market without having to have multiple cards in hand, which is something that's pretty important. You do, on the other hand, have to have a unit of your color out, and you have to be able to sacrifice that unit's ability to block for a turn in order to get access to it. So there is a clear opportunity cost to playing this. In addition, there's a clear threshold to playing this. You're not going to be able to play the market card until around turn 4, meaning that you get access to the market cards later, but you have a little bit less card disadvantage as a result of playing them, so it's not strictly worse than playing a regular market card. In fact, in many ways it is better because you are no longer sacrificing a card to trade into your market, which is something that the one-cost cards had as a disadvantage primarily. Finally, the thing that I really like about this card is that it is effectively a seek power. I've talked a lot about how seek powers are just really, really important for new player decks and our Eternal Basic decks and other things like that. When we are doing like basic videos, we tend to advise people to bring chance and to bring seek powers because those cards provide you with a level of consistency and a level of just like better play as a result of their ability to both thin out your deck so that you don't draw a lot more power, to a small extent, but also the ability to make sure that you are getting power in your opening hands such that you are going to have a fun experience without a lot of power screw. In those situations, like Primal Etchings is something that you definitely want access to, since this is effectively a free sigil that you are pulling out of your deck, and then later on, if you don't need a sigil, you can use this card instead as a sideboard option in your market. So this is a card that basically is going to be in almost every deck, but also because it's almost in every deck, that means that almost every deck is going to have a seek power of some kind in a 4 of, meaning that you are at the 29 sources required to have basically a really consistent and fun game. I think this is super new player friendly. I think that this is the kind of thing where basically if you have these cards in your deck, you're actually getting access to some like really good market stuff. And notably, this is our very first uncommon market option. So this is something that new players are going to be able to put into their decks very early on to get access to a market and to play with it without having to spend a lot of shiftstone. It's a budget market option. It's also a market option that has a lot of strength in terms of card advantage. It doesn't require you to make a difficult trade-off, but it does require you to fulfill the requirements of the card in order to get access to your sideboard, meaning that your sideboard is a little bit rarer, but that your sideboard is now a powerful option that you can access and something that you have to work towards in order to get access to it. I think all of that is just super good design. And like, as far as these Etchings cards go, I think this is something that really provides a lot of value to Eternal in general. When I first looked at this card, I immediately was just like, oh, this is terrible. This is a one-cost market spell again. But after looking at it for a while, I really think that these cards are going to be very interesting. Some of them have very cool art. I think all of them have like this sort of like orb that is in some way affecting the environment. We have Fire Etchings here, which is a pretty beautiful caldera. We have the Shadow Etchings, which is a option in a graveyard. I'm really hoping that I can find all 5 of these. We have Time Etchings. And finally, we have the Justice Etchings, which is a statue. And I'm trying to find that one in particular. There we go. So these 5 cards seem like great market options. I really like the initial design of them. I think that they should be really good expedition designs, and although it seems unlikely that they are going to serve as a replacement in the current expeditions for cards like Blazing Salvo, Transpose, etc., I really look forward to the time when those cards are going to rotate out. At the very least, Primal Etchings is a clear replacement for Transpose, and many of these other etchings are going to be seen in a lot of value. This doesn't get rid of Blazing Salvo from Expedition, but I do think that it is a solid replacement that when the time comes for Blazing Salvo to rotate out, will have a significant improvement on the game state, and will also have a significant improvement on the game state while people are playing them right now. They are just really interesting cards. They provide you with a lot of access to your sideboard, but they have a significant cost and a significant sort of opportunity cost that I think is really interesting, and they feel good to play. You are just not going to have a bad market trade where you have to trade away one of your favorite cards to get access to a good good market card. That's something that I think is kind of important about the design of them, is that they feel better to play on your end, and also that they feel better for your opponent to sort of see them, because, you know, at this point when you're getting access to a market card from your sideboard, that feels a lot more fair than if they are basically playing it on turn one and getting that same card that they always get over and over and over again. So this is something where, like, I just think the design of it is just really much better in terms of how they are approaching market cards. I think that they kind of listen to the feedback on those cards quite a bit, and this is something that should have like a lot of sort of improvement on the health of the game. So yeah, these cards are really cool. Overall, they seem very, very interesting. I'm very excited about all of these mechanics. They seem pretty new player friendly, which is nice. Like, if we want to get new people in, I think that these mechanics are sort of great places to start. They are really fun mechanics in general. Revenge is a fun mechanic that, like, players tend to enjoy if they are not too focused on the RNG aspect of it. I know a lot of people do not like Revenge, and so, like, that is certainly going to be something that we are going to be seeing some comments on in the future, but like, I do think that, like, that's like a pretty friendly mechanic that has like a lot of the sort of excitement of Eternal attached to it. I think that Decay is a simple enough mechanic that also provides you with like some really interesting board state stuff, and I think that like the current setup of Plunder really improves just the overall gameplay of the game in a way that is going to be pretty satisfying. So really learning off of the previous lessons with treasure troves and what kind of things you want to do with treasure troves, I think that that is something that, like, very much makes it so that the game is going to be a lot of fun to play in the future. So I'm excited about this set. This seems like a really cool set of mechanics. I think that, like, the market change is really interesting, and this is a good way to approach market cards. I like that there are like a lot of cheap and available options for markets now. That's going to be really interesting, and I'm looking forward to playing with these cards. So that's where I'm at. That's it from me for now. We're going to be continuing to break down spoilers as we go along, but for now, thank you so much for watching. My name is Pojo. You can find me on Twitch, YouTube, Patreon, and Twitter. And as always, you can like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, all of those things, and help out with the stream or the YouTube in that way. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Cheers.